Hello, and welcome to another episode of my podcast, The Global Agora. My name is Andrej Matišák, and I work as the deputy head of the foreign desk at the Slovak daily Pravda, which by the name means truth, and is not the Russian Pravda. The NATO summit was held on July 7th to 8th in Ankara. The declaration from the meeting in Turkey has 6 paragraphs, and in this episode of The Global Agora, I dissect them with Roger Hilton. He's a Canadian global affairs and defense analyst from GlobSec, living in Central Europe. So what went right and what went wrong for NATO at the Ankara summit? And will the meeting first of all be remembered for Donald Trump's mood swings? Listen to our conversation. If you enjoy what I do, please support me on Coffee. You can find the link in the description of this episode. And now, on to the new debate. Roger, US President Donald Trump came to Ankara, threw some rhetorical grenades, said the US should control Greenland and call Spain a terrible partner. Can the alliance function in a mode where it needs to please Trump as much as possible? They told me, sir, we love you, he claims.
That's a good one. Obviously, Andre, is like NATO being over 75 years. It's gone through a lot of leadership. There's 32 allies. But I think what comes out right now is how we tied the behavior of allies to Trump is determined by one overarching goal, right? And that is like to keep the United States engaged in NATO, like to keep American presence in a somewhat limited way on the continent, and more importantly, to keep NATO together, right? I mean, there was a huge amount of bluster before he took over when Marco Rubio was the senator about sort of enshrining in law that he can't leave. But the truth of the matter is, speaking very pragmatically, there's a new language and there's a new way that you need to engage with the president. And unfortunately, I think sort of this kiss the ring, gloating him is what's required to successfully achieve the mission. It goes without saying, Andre, like publicly speaking, this doesn't help anybody, right? Calling out allies so brutally. Is there some truth to it? Absolutely. I mean, I think we would all agree, coming from countries who were spending a lot less, without this shock to the system, it wouldn't have gotten it out there. My fear is that it's weaponized and then it's leveraged for domestic political reasons and then for external, miscreant actors or whatnot. So there's the public facade to dealing with Trump. But then again, you being in Ankara, and from what I've read, privately at least, the Pentagon and Rubio have at least been impressed with Europe stepping up in terms of the defense spending. They're very much at the beginning of this process, right? This doesn't happen overnight. And there's many more milestones to go before there is like a real acknowledgement that Europe can stand on its feet. But as I said, I mean, all allies, the ones, let's say, the most exposed, the Baltics, they need to sort of circumvent around the strategy that will, or coalesce around the strategy that will keep the United States engaged in NATO at all costs. And unfortunately, this is what's required at the moment. And the next 2 years versus what comes after the election will be a different strategy.
I want to talk about the 6 points from the summit declaration one by one, basically.
Massive declaration, Andre, right?
Yeah, very massive one. But first, briefly, from your perspective, what went right and what went wrong for NATO at the Ankara summit?
Well, I mean, let's just break it down into 2 things, right? I mean, again, the expectations, I would say from my perspective, were relatively low in what was going to be delivered. This was, again, another milestone in the buildup from the beginning, from Spain, from Vilnius, from The Hague, right? So I think putting all of this pressure on this summit to have been so transformational might have been misplaced a little bit. Again, I sound like a broken record, but we leave Ankara with Trump in a good mood, that the alliance is still together, and we'll get to it afterwards, that he on the record recommitted to Article 5. I think in terms of, new skill set and let's say new muscles that the alliance is delivering, again, pumping, the Canadian angle, the fact that you had 5 NATO allies, you had then Ukraine and Turkey joining as well in the Defense and Security Resiliency Bank, they were at least figuring out ways to practically unlock capital, move industry forward, and most importantly, sort of power this European engine. I'm just really stressing already that this is such a long-term process in terms of strategic culture, labor, intellectual property, people working together. So in that sense, you've had some points on investments, where they're going to go. Is that in detail enough? How are we going to measure success is a good one. I would say the biggest failure, or what Europe missed this opportunity on, is saying where and how they are going to lead even more. Whether that needed to be in the declaration is another issue, but it kind of seemed they were just throwing cash at the problem and buying their way out of it. saying we're going to have Lockheed Martin come here and make Javelin. So it might have been a missed opportunity, or you had Macron in Syria before, and all types of leaders saying, Europe needs to stand on its feet. But I didn't get the feeling coming out of it that there was really this clear path that Trump could have also said that in 5 years, we expect to decrease the presence in the Ramstein to a certain level or whatever it is. So as I said, I mean, not so much to unpack in 6 paragraphs. The money is there. Will it turn into capabilities? That's the next issue. But as I said, I mean, this foresight and long-term thinking tactically about how Europe is going to take over is something that they did miss in Ankara.
Let's look at the declaration. And you've mentioned a couple of points already, but the first paragraph is about the ironclad commitment to collective defense under Article 5. Nothing to see here? Or was it important to add it?
Well, I mean, I think, Andre, who's the audience of this when we talk about, Article 5 and its ironclad, right? So, Andre, despite the craziness and the turbulence, in the lead up in Davos with Spain, with Greenland, Trump's musing about making Canada the 51st state or even trying to cut off all trade with Spain, right? So, I mean, think about that. That's 3 different countries, 2 different continents where there's been political turbulence with it. At the end of the day, you still have an assessment in the Kremlin that if they went and they tried to do something on the ground, they still are of the position, it seems, that the United States would back them up a little bit, right? Something that didn't get a lot of love, which I made a huge point of, is that, like, even from the deterrence standpoint, they've shifted the air policing mission in the Baltics to a defense mission, right? Which has given the fighter jets more opportunities to shoot down and be more aggressive a little bit. And then going back to Russia, Andre, their preferred tactic against NATO is still this gray zone, limited accountability, limited viability attacks, where Globsec report over 150 plus attacks. So they still assess Putin, Medvedev, everybody, that even if they had some sort of, saving Russians on the way to Kaliningrad or a false flag operation, they still are of the position fundamentally that the US would come in. The level of involvement, the firepower, the manpower is still to be determined, but they still don't think that at the end of the day, this would be a solely European operation, right, to defend NATO territory. So again, the ultimate test here is, what does Putin actually think about it? And it's quite clear at this point. Did you guys see who the NATO released the spending figures? And did you see the 5 countries who have already hit the 5%?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No surprise, right? It's the Baltic states and Poland. And I think what that actually also shows, at least for Trump and people in the Pentagon, more importantly, is that they are taking every opportunity preemptively to take care of their own security. And that's important because even going back to Trump's first term, when Thomas Ilves was the president of Estonia, he was very clear saying we've always hit the 2%. Lithuania is over 5%. They're building the Baltic defense line. They're doing this weekend warriors. So it must be said, at least for the states that are most exposed or most vulnerable, that they are taking every option possible to show the Pentagon that we have done everything in our power to be ready for this. And when push comes to shove, we need your help. So I think that's something that shouldn't be discounted, that, those on the front line are doing it. And then, sorry, just the one thing which also didn't get it is Lithuania and Finland, there's been changes on the legislation level in terms of the deployment of nuclear weapons. That's really in the minutia of things, but also that the legislation is also adapting to the security situation. I mean, it's already changed with police forces being able to shoot down drones, Lithuania with all of these cigarette drones coming from Belarus. So also the policy is also, evolving at the same time as the security level. So all of those things put together shows that the most exposed states are taking it seriously, and it gives the United States at least, some good vibes to say they've done all they can. Now they need the cavalry to come in and back them up at the lowest level.
So the second paragraph reads, to counter the long-term threats Russia poses to Euro-Atlantic security and stability and the persistent threat of terrorism, allies are delivering on the Hague defense commitment. Is NATO delivering on its financial pledges?
I'm in the comms department, and I just really want to reiterate to the readers in Slovakia, wherever, that this is so much money that, that the states have to come up with. I think they have to be very conscious of the standards of living, speaking from the Canadian perspective, the price of groceries, rent, energy. So, I mean, I think there needs to be some flexibility when you assess, is NATO delivering on its financial pledges? Social welfare systems are being cut. They're gutting other ministries to find out the money. They're raising taxes. I mean, these are all unbelievably unpopular programs. The Lithuanian ambassador in Vienna famously said, without security, we have nothing, right? So is NATO delivering on its financial pledges? I think they're making the best, each ally is making the best case or the best situation moving forward on how to do it. You see Keir Starmer, where you have the UK, a G7 country, it's still sort of trying to make the case with the chancellery about how are they going to get to even 3%. So the idea is there that the political leaders want it, but now finding the cash and more importantly, selling it to the voters is something that is like really very difficult, finding income sources to finance this. So is NATO delivering on its financial pledges? It's a to be determined, let's see. But the early signs of what they've come up with, that laggards like Canada, Belgium, Spain have already come up to the 2%, is already something that shouldn't be discounted, right? It's 3.5 on military and then 1.5 on infrastructure and capabilities is a huge amount of money in a time with low growth, low competitiveness, a trade war going on, between the United States and the world. So under the circumstances, I think they're doing an excellent job. And, Andre, when we go to the shooting range to try our guns from Erdogan, we can reevaluate this. But I think it's a work in progress, and the early signs are saying that it's trending in the right direction.
We are building the future, a stronger Europe in a stronger NATO, a modernized alliance. European alliance and Canada, working with the United States, are assuming great responsibility for the alliance defense. This is written in the third paragraph. Is this a case of burden shifting, and are the Americans leaving Europe?
Let's just start off with this massive clickbait, sensational headline about America leaving Europe. This should not be a surprise or a shock to anyone at this point. I mean, we need to get this very clear, right? I know you have some towns in Bavaria that are unbelievably committed to American force presences, but this is the law of the land now. The United States have other casing policy priorities, and Europe cannot try to delay this withdrawal, right? It's going to happen, and what they need to focus on is having it done in an orderly, coordinated manner and to have the resources to do it. Andre, just, for this instance, again, whether it was signaling ahead of it, you had China's Navy who test fired a ballistic missile from a nuclear submarine in the Pacific Ocean on Monday. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's only the third time China has done that, the last two being in the last 5 years. But the fact is that there is so much more preoccupying the US in Asia on soft security challenges, rare earth minerals, supply chains, magnets, technology transfers, that they just can't be preoccupied with having to devote so many forces to Europe. You saw with what's happening in Iran that their ammunition stockpiles are down. The NATO PUR list, priority Ukrainian requirement list. They are pulling equipment that has already been paid for Ukraine or for NATO allies, and they are holding it themselves. I see this as an opportunity that Europe really needs to step up and take, responsibility for all of it. This could be a great economic catalyst. We talk about labor issues. People can't find jobs, finding new labor, new opportunities for these people. And, Audrey, here in Berlin, and I was moderating at Berlin Defense Tech Week, which is Silicon Valley meets private capital. And what came out for me here is that the ideas are here in Europe, right? There's a lot, Andre, there's a lot of buzzwords. We have the people, we have the technology, right? But what here is getting these projects over the finish line is both a question of political will, late stage capital, which again, I'm learning is that Europe needs to really see through these ideas. And something that NATO has been talking about more is that there needs to be more risk in the decision making, right? I'm not saying this needs to be Silicon Valley, you fail 1,000 times, but the idea that they need a safe, very low return on investment is no longer possible. So again, are Americans leaving Europe? Yes, but it should be, with a postcard and we can't wait to see you next time. And we're there to support you where we can, right? So, I mean, Letter report, Draghi reports, the lights are flashing enough for Europe that it's time to step up and do this on your own. And this is a sign of confidence, especially from Matt Whitaker, who's the US ambassador to NATO, saying in 5 years, they can do this. Who is it from Globsec? General Badia said a very doable milestone would be in 5 or 6 years to have Europe be able to conventionally equal Russia. I mean, that's a lot of hardware, Andre, but that seems to be something that is a goal that they can reach on. So we need to sort of, again, like the language dealing with Trump, we need to accept the reality and get on board with this and move it forward to our advantage as also Canadians and Europeans.
The fourth paragraph says Ukraine contributes to transatlantic security and allies stand united in our unwavering support for Ukraine in defending its freedom, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. Why did NATO not mention Russia specifically here? And can Ukraine be satisfied with the summit?
Let's move back a little bit. I mean, Audrey, if we talk about let's say the peak or the euphoria of Ukraine and NATO, you would say with the Vilnius summit, they had those amazing buses saying by the time you've read this, Ukraine will be a member. You have a new chief of staff, Budanov, coming from the intelligence agency. I think Kiev is ruthlessly pragmatic of where they stand right now with NATO. Nobody here was talking about them joining it. They already have the NATO Ukraine Council where they essentially can call these meetings at will as they want. So again, it's this whole thing about ascension, of course, everybody wants them to join, or the people who are really supportive of them. They realize this is not going to happen anytime soon, and they've had to work within the confines of what they are. The real win here for Ukraine is not that the meeting didn't fall off the rails, but that Trump thinks that Ukraine is actually winning the war. 44% of Russia's oil refinery capacity has been damaged. These amazing POV images that I'm sure Trump has seen of crashing in St. Petersburg and Moscow. I mean, the visuals are very striking. Trump doesn't like to back losers, right? He wants to be the winner all the time. So him saying that he endorses this strategy, long-term strikes, is already a massive success for Kiev, right? And most importantly, Zelensky wore a suit to the meeting. I don't put so much stock in the idea with the Patriot licensing. These are unbelievably complex, expensive, building manpower and whatnot. And it's going to be years, Andre. Again, at that same shooting range, we go with our gun from President Erdogan for industry and the manpower to come online. But again, the signal here is not that these are going to appear in 5 or 10 years. It's just that the idea that Trump is even licensing out this idea, not the production, to Ukraine, is also a sign to Putin that, their assessment is that, well, you had your chance to do it. You couldn't make any advance on your offensive. And now I'm switching sides like a mercenary, right? Because Ukraine the kill box is massive and they're just doing spectacular things, right? You see in Crimea with the gas shortages and whatnot. On the idea of why they didn't mention Russia here, I mean, everybody knows who they're talking about. Maybe it was a personal favor to his good friend Russia, to do it. And again, I'm not hopeful that the United States, or it's not my preference that the United States should play a role in the peace process. I mean, this has to be almost bilaterally with Ukraine sitting at the table with Russia. So it's not a travesty per se that Russia wasn't mentioned. And as I said, those who are most conscious of what Russia's capable of, they are clear-eyed. As we said, they're already spending 5%. They're preparing their populations. And even the idea that there's going to be this false flag operation in Poland, right? Intelligence sharing is still going on. So they're ready in the event that something happens.
You mentioned Ukraine and NATO, the membership of Ukraine in NATO. In fact, the current Slovak government is claiming that we have been right from the beginning when we said that Ukraine cannot join NATO. And basically everybody is saying this now. How do you see this? Would you assess this in the same way that everybody knows Ukraine cannot join NATO?
Let's be honest, anybody can join NATO if there's political will. They're not, the same analogies, but you also had West Germany and Berlin, which was occupied. So, I mean, when there's a political will to do it, I haven't had the opportunity to meet Mr. Fico, but I would just say from a strictly tactical and strategic level, do you really want to keep a country out that is so clearly an exporter of security? They're not one of these states that is just looking to be covered with a blanket for protection. They are at the cutting edge, Andre, of innovation and transformational policy, multi-domain operations, the future of what the troops training look like. And, again, talking here in Berlin Defense Week, the time when the war ends or there's a ceasefire and armistice, I mean, can you just think of the jump in capacity if you had Ukrainian soldiers from the front line training Slovak soldiers on drones, on strategy, decentralized decision making? So I would question the idea that to think that this is going to be a catalyst for further war or it's going to escalate, I think is very misplaced. And the advantages of bringing Ukraine in from a strictly security standpoint, what they know, what they can do, what we can learn, all of these exercises, Andre, on drones, they said, again, these buzzwords, you've had 10 Ukrainian drone operators who have taken out thousands of Swedish troops in these exercises. Ukraine doesn't have a navy. and they have pushed out the Russian Navy. It's unbelievable what they've been able to do with nothing. Obviously, there's a pressure on them to deliver for survival. But again, going back to whether they should join or not, the idea that they could transfer this knowledge, how Ukraine would view the situation in the Arctic or in the Mediterranean with smuggling. I mean, they are full of great and creative ideas. So if there's a political way to do it, but the fact that, they don't want to upset somebody and giving a third country a veto to do it is unbelievably misplaced. And at least when Stoltenberg was SecGen, he made that very clear, right? That this is our decision to make, and this is not even on the table to negotiate with the Kremlin about who joins and who doesn't.
The fifth paragraph refers to Iran. Was it a necessary mention?
I mean, Andre, it's the cost of doing business, right? Let's just say very diplomatically, it's an occupational hazard. I mean, maybe this was just inserted at the last second, right? Because things took a drastic turn during the summit and whatnot. Let's look at it. Both of us aren't lawyers, but Andre, there's nothing here that is ironclad. It's unbelievably ambiguous, just like the 60-day ceasefire. There's nothing specific about committing forces. I think this is a very easy, let's fingers up. Should Iran ever have a nuclear weapon, and respect to freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, there's nothing in there about, European allies minesweeping or defending or, providing coverage or whatnot. It's not even clear when it comes to sort of like if they can take the Omani route or the route through Iran. So listen, if this was Rutte's idea to put it in to show Trump that, they are committed to it and that they're on the same page ideologically, it probably doesn't count for much for him, but at least he got it in, and he can say on his next presser on the old Air Force One, because from what I read that he stopped using the Qatari one already. He's got a very short, one point that he can put in there, and as they said, that they love him and he felt the love at the end of the summit.
We look forward to our next meeting. This is what the sixth paragraph claims, but there are doubts that the next meeting will take place next year in Tirana. Do we need summits every year?
Well, I mean, I think going back to it, it's a new thing, right? That it happens every year. And of course, at GlobeSec, we love it after the forum that there's another NATO summit. Joking aside, I think Rutte and his office and his team, I think they need to have a very sober and frank discussion about the risk-reward ratio, if it's worth having it every year. Again, these are unbelievably choreographed, time-consuming exercises, right? And putting on pageantry. And let's just say for the most part, you have the majority of the allies who want to play ball. I know it takes maybe 6 months, a year to get the declaration going and not an exit. But at the end of the day, Andre, it's like no level of preparation can prepare the people on the ground, like for Trump's material attitude. I thought it was very impressive with Rutte in the White House, how he's coined this Trump trillions. He's using billboards, he knows how to speak to the audience. But when he's just sitting there and, for no reason, again, bringing up, designs on Greenland or Canada, it just is unnecessary turbulence, right? In a time when we should all be unified against Russia and the greater threat, China, terrorism, weaponized AI and whatnot. The location itself is also quite interesting because, as you know, there's this flamingo revolution going on where Trump's family members are very much involved. You got to love Eddie Rama still wearing like sneakers to the family photo. I think also Albania has been one of those countries in the later category in terms of defense spending. I mean, maybe when they pony up and they can really prove to the Pentagon that they're hitting this certain amount, they can do it. But I mean, all the leaders meeting, maybe they need to sort of be a bit more creative in sort of a hybrid format, right? Where some people go on the ground, like the way they did in COVID. Of course, you want to have people in person, but you really, really have to evaluate at the end of the day if the juice is worth the squeeze, right? And here, Audrey, like you saw, I think we would say it barely came through that it was worth all of the meeting in person, right? But it wasn't without sensational headlines or some headaches for the SecGen, right? He said, what? So to be determined, but I think they need to just really evaluate if this is a good idea or not.
Roger, you're of course Canadian. Is Canada going to be a part of the European pillar of NATO?
Well, Europe is going to be part of Canadian security, right? No. Listen, I think the Prime Minister has done an admirable job sort of doubling down partnership with Europe. Again, Andre, as a Canadian living in Europe, I have my own very determined views about Europe's competitiveness, what the future holds economically, demographic issues and stuff. So I would be very hesitant about Canada going all in on Europe. So I think this diversified portfolio with Canada is good, but you've already seen some great first things, right? There was a company from Montreal that got the first EU safe contract for Canada and Europe working together. Controversially or not, Canada selected both Germany and Norway for their big submarine platform a little bit. And, again, joking aside, I mean, Canada really does need Europe for the preservation of national sovereignty and, from a diplomatic standpoint. I know, Andre, where our third shooting gun exercise will go in the Arctic. But, the same way that Canada had to pay up front, right? I mean, about supporting Denmark when it came to the controversies with Greenland. They're leading the battalion in Latvia. There's over 3,000 Canadian forces serving in Europe at the moment. So, I mean, the synergies for Canada being part of the European pillar of NATO are very clear. But I just also think that it cuts both ways, right? Because Canada offers Europe so much in terms of natural resources, rare earth minerals, access to the Pacific. Culturally speaking, they're very aligned. And I think both people from a strategic culture are learning that, we are in a very predatory international environment at the moment, and that working together is essential, right, for countries that, necessarily don't have the hardware like China, Russia, or the United States.
Roger, to wrap it up, do you think, of course, we don't know, we don't have a crystal ball, but do you think that in the future we will look at the summit at something that we spark to historical, or probably the most memorable moment will be the fact that President Erdogan gave all the leaders a gun with the live ammo?
That will be a good pub quiz when we go for a people bar, Andre. But I think mine is the political side about it, having also prepared this preview in Vienna before with the Turkish ambassador. I think at least what will stand out was, how deep and how impressive the industry forum was. This was not just about sort of throwing names out there and financial numbers. This was really about sort of talking about hard capabilities, scaling, getting capital in there, and moving things forward. So, I mean, as we said with General Badia, who's on GlobeSec's European Defense Initiative, if we really start to see tangible benefits to European defense industry, whether it's mergers or, innovation happening, and that Europe is able to stand on its 2 feet, I think we can look back and say that was really the jump off point, right? That industry forum really moved things forward. And it's not necessarily the sexiest thing to talk about, but it's really the devil is in the details. So they went all in on really pushing this industry side. And now look, the demand side from government is out there. This is what we need. These are the resources we have. So the ball is now in industry's court, right? About scaling up labor, expanding production lines. So as I said, Andre, we have quite a few future conversations to have when I have even less hair and, we're having even more fun. So overall, yeah, summit is success, but I think the industry side was, for me, what we can really look forward to measuring in the future.
This was another episode of my podcast, The Global Agora. Subscribe and listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other platforms. If you enjoy what I do, please support me on Ko-fi. The link is in the episode description. Thank you for listening and stay tuned.